At Thanksgiving, my sister discovered I had $12 million inheritance, and my family demanded I give it to her, claiming she deserved it more. Hi everyone. Before we dive into today's video, I'd like to ask for a little favor. We've noticed the channel has been slowing down a bit, and subscribing is one of the easiest and most meaningful ways you can help us. Super quick, completely free, and it lets us keep delivering the kind of content you love. Your support truly means the world to us. It's what keeps us motivated and excited to keep going. So let's work together and help this channel grow even stronger. Thank you so much for your amazing support, and now let's jump right into the video. Thanksgiving in my family has always been a special occasion, but for me, it has always carried a strange, intense feeling. I'm Nilko, 38 years old, and since I was little, I've felt like a shadow in my own family. All the attention, whether from my parents or other family members, has always been directed at my sister, Delta. She, despite not doing anything particularly special, has always been pampered and cared for, especially because of the health issues she faced as a child. Meanwhile, no matter how hard I tried, I was always overlooked. Delta, 30 years old, is the golden child of the family. Every time she smiles, the whole family is happy. Whenever she faces any problems, the whole family worries. I, on the other hand, seem to be nothing more than a faint figure in these stories. Every time I tried to earn recognition, my parents would turn to care for her, because Delta is the one who needs the most attention. My parents, Belle and Robert, have never truly acknowledged me. They were always busy with Delta, and I had to do everything on my own. Thanksgiving dinner had always been a mixed bag for me. While everyone else looked forward to the holiday as a time for family bonding, I dreaded it. Not because I hated the food or the festivities, but because it was the one time of the year I was forced to confront just how invisible I had become in my own family. My sister Delta, the golden child, always managed to steal the spotlight, whether it was with her latest health scare or her small accomplishments that were blown up into grand achievements. Even when she shared the smallest details, the family showered her with special attention. Meanwhile, no matter how hard I tried, I was never really valued. This year, however, something felt different. Even though everyone was still enjoying themselves, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was an underlying tension in the air. It was as if something was about to explode. The $12 million inheritance, the secret I'd kept for so long, was becoming harder and harder to hide. It felt like it was on the verge of being exposed. And then, in a moment I never saw coming, Delta accidentally discovered what I had been hiding all these years. The entire room fell silent. No one said a word. A wave of conflict started to rise, shattering the peace that had been there just moments before. Everything in my family changed when Delta was born. At first, I thought it was a natural thing. Having a younger sister meant I would have to share my parents' love. But over time, I realized that this change wasn't just about sharing love, but about being replaced. My parents focused all their attention on her, not just because she needed special care, but because they loved her so much and always pampered her to the point where they didn't pay attention to me. Delta, despite being younger, always knew how to get my parents to cater to her. She would constantly whine and do anything to get attention, and each time I had to step aside. If she wanted to sit next to Mom, I would have to stand up so she could sit, even though I was already there. If she wanted something, whether it was food or a toy, my mom would always be the one to serve her, and I, even if I needed something, would have to wait my turn. At those times, I felt like I didn't exist in this family. There were times when Delta simply whined to get my parents' attention. One time when we were playing together, Delta started crying over something small. My parents immediately rushed to comfort her, ignoring me, the older child sitting next to them, feeling abandoned and left out. While I just sat there watching all the attention go to her, the feeling of being forgotten grew even stronger. Delta's whining gradually became a habit, and I had no choice but to accept it. I didn't dare to argue with my parents, nor did I object when my sister was being troublesome. I became the patient one, always stepping back to make way for her, not because I didn't love her, but because I understood that she needed more care. The more this happened, the more deeply I felt hurt, as I sacrificed everything for my younger sister to get everything she wanted. That's why, on that Thanksgiving night, as my family and of course my sister gathered around the table, I looked into my parents' eyes and felt the deep lack of affection. My sister accidentally dropped a book and then suddenly asked, "Do you ever feel like everyone only cares for me and no one pays attention to you?" That question was like a painful acknowledgement of the truth I had been enduring all these years. the clear favoritism my family showed towards my sister. I looked into my parents' eyes, but they just smiled dismissively and turned away. Everything shattered. My parents couldn't understand how I felt, and I realized that I was just an outsider in my own family. Though I never received much attention from my parents, I stubbornly pursued success in school and extracurricular activities. In the world of my family, academic achievements were the only weapon I had to prove my worth. Yet even when I reached new heights, those victories always felt like fleeting shadows, passing unnoticed without leaving a mark. Each accomplishment, born from hours of hard work and sweat, seemed to fade into insignificance, overshadowed by the blinding brilliance of my sister. When I was young, I believed my efforts would be recognized. But as I grew older, I came to a painful truth. My parents never saw me, never truly acknowledged what I had done. Every success of mine, whether it was a scholarship, an award, or a feat in sports, was met with silence, while my sister's simple achievements, a silly song or a hastily drawn picture, were praised as though she had just created a masterpiece. One glaring example was when I won first place in the science fair with a renewable energy project, a topic I had immersed myself in for months. I dreamt of a proud look from my parents, gentle pat on the back, but instead I received only silence. No congratulations, no words of encouragement. Meanwhile, my sister's trivial accomplishments, like singing a simple tune or painting a meaningless picture, were lauded by the entire family as if she were the brightest star in the house. When I stood there, gazing into my parents' eyes, I felt the injustice that had been silently eating away at me for years. Everything I had done, everything I had achieved, seemed utterly insignificant in their eyes. My efforts were buried in the dark, while Delta, despite doing nothing extraordinary, was always lifted up and given their full attention. That feeling, being ignored, not being valued, became a wound that never healed. I had spent months practicing for the school talent show, pouring all my heart into an emotional rendition of Bridge Over Troubled Water on the piano. I wanted to prove to my family, especially my parents, that I was capable of doing something extraordinary, something deserving of their attention. But when the night of the performance arrived, everything took an unexpected turn. Just as I was about to take the stage, my sister fell ill. Naturally, my parents immediately decided to stay home and take care of her, completely overlooking my event. Once again, I was pushed aside, and I had to face the painful reality that I would always stand in the shadow of my sister. While I performed in the dimly lit school auditorium, my parents were at home, tending to my sister's illness. I couldn't help but feel like a ghost. All my hard work, all the hours of practice seemed to fade into nothing. It was the final confirmation that, in this family, my achievements would never matter as much as hers. I began to realize that I was always living in the shadow of my sister. No matter how hard I tried, I could never surpass the favoritism my family showed toward her. Every success of mine, no matter how big, felt insignificant compared to the endless attention my sister always received. The feeling of being overlooked, of never being acknowledged, followed me like a shadow I could never escape. However, in my darkest moments, I found some comfort in my grandmother Helen, the only one who ever truly loved and understood me unconditionally. The moments spent with her, when she comforted me with genuine care, were the rare times I felt valued. Still, I knew that my grandmother's love, though deep, couldn't replace the recognition I longed for from my family. While she always showed me love, what I truly yearned for was acknowledgement and affection from my parents, the ones who had always placed my sister above everything else. My high school years felt like a series of personal victories, though I was always lacking recognition from my family. I joined several clubs, including the debate team, and worked part-time at a local diner. The long days spent pouring my energy into work and study made me realize that no one in my family seemed to care about my achievements. However, the recognition from my friends and teachers at school made me feel valued. At times, I would ask myself if I truly existed in my parents' eyes, because whenever my sister had an issue, no matter how small, the family would gather around her. I felt disappointed when I thought about this. I continued working hard not just to stand out at school, but to create a better life for myself. I understood that my parents either couldn't or didn't want to recognize me the way they did my sister. They always said that I was grown up and could take care of myself, but in reality I was being overlooked. My achievements seemed to pale in comparison to hers, while every step she took was celebrated as a great success. Once again I found myself living in her shadow. However, I began to realize something. The recognition from my parents might never come, and I couldn't keep living in that shadow. The small successes I had were enough to make me proud and keep me pushing forward. But sometimes I still felt like my accomplishments were insignificant when compared to my sisters. Every award, every leadership role in a club, no matter how much effort I put in, never seemed to get the attention from my parents. I realized that I had to create my own path, one that didn't rely on their approval. When it came time to apply to college, I had no choice but to manage everything on my own. I applied to top schools like Harvard and Princeton, tackling every step myself without any help from my family. My parents didn't show any interest in what I was doing to shape my future. I was left to handle it all independently. I spent countless hours researching universities, meticulously crafting my application essays, and completing assignments that would shape my future, without any guidance or support. My parents never once asked about my goals, my hopes for the future, or my choice of schools. It was as if my aspirations were invisible to them. They never seemed to care about my journey. I realized that if I wanted a future worth to live, I would have to build it on my own, because no one else was going to do it for me. The feeling of neglect became even more pronounced as I realized that my self-reliance would never be a priority for my family. Whenever I brought up scholarships or asked about financial aid, my parents would brush me off with a simple response, telling me to figure it out on my own. Despite this, I refused to give up. I kept pushing forward, determined to carve out my own path. With no one to lean on, I found strength in my own perseverance. Gradually, I developed an unwavering resolve, and I began to build a future that was completely in my hands, one that depended on no one but myself. When I received my SAT results with a perfect score of 1600, I thought it was a major accomplishment. Finally, I had done something remarkable. But when I shared the news with my parents, I was met with silence. Instead of sharing in my joy, they ignored it, showing no interest. They didn't express any excitement, didn't congratulate me. The feeling was incredibly frustrating. I had achieved something that not everyone could, but I didn't receive a single word of encouragement, not even a pat on the back. Their silence made me realize that I would never receive the attention I deserved from them. Even though I had achieved something significant, I was still just the child on the sidelines, always standing in the shadow of my sister, never given the chance to truly shine in my family. The day I received my acceptance package from the University of Michigan, I should have felt elated, but instead, there was a strange mix of relief and sadness. My parents, as usual, were consumed with my sister's latest issue, her cheerleading competitions, and her ever-growing needs. They hardly even acknowledged the news that I had been accepted into one of the most prestigious universities in the country. It was the moment I had worked so hard for, but it felt hollow because I knew my family wouldn't truly understand or celebrate it. I packed my bags in silence, my emotions a tangled mess. I was leaving home, but not in the way I had imagined. I was stepping out not just into the world, but away from a family that had never truly seen me. The feeling of leaving was bittersweet. On one hand, I was finally escaping, creating the life I wanted, but on the other, I was doing it without the support or recognition I had always longed for. The absence of my family's pride and acknowledgement made this milestone feel strangely lonely, though it was something I knew I had to do for my own growth. At college, I had no financial support from my parents, so I worked double shifts at the diner, saving every penny to cover my expenses. Every dollar counted, whether it was for tuition, books, or just getting by. My grandmother Helen, despite the distance, was my only source of emotional support. She sent me a $500 gift to help with moving expenses, and her words of encouragement were the only things that kept me going through the grueling work schedule. While my parents stayed indifferent to my struggles, Grandma Helen's kindness reminded me that I wasn't entirely alone. She may have been miles away, but her support felt more real than anything my parents ever offered. Still, the financial burden was crushing. I worked tirelessly, determined to succeed, to prove that I could create a future for myself, one that didn't require anyone else's help. My college experience was a blur of hard work and constant hustle. I balanced full-time studies with my part-time job, trying to stay afloat while building a future. There were no moments of leisure or carefree days. Every decision, every action was a step toward creating the life I knew I deserved. My grades remained strong, and I eventually graduated summa cum laude, but even that was met with indifference. My family, still lost in the whirlwind of my sister's demands, didn't even acknowledge my achievement. I had achieved so much, yet it felt like it meant nothing to them. My graduation wasn't a celebration. It was just another day for them. My sister's needs continued to dominate the family narrative, while my accomplishments seemed to fade into the background. Despite everything I had done, I was still treated as the invisible child, always striving for recognition that would never come. After graduating, I landed an entry-level job at a prestigious auction house. The work was initially tedious, documenting high-end estate sales, dealing with endless collections of furniture, art, and antiques. At first, it seemed like the kind of job no one would notice, but over time I began to develop a keen eye for valuable antiques. I discovered my passion for vintage jewelry, an area that intrigued me and fueled my curiosity. As I dug deeper into the world of antiques, I started to notice things that others didn't. My training in debate and research, the skills I had honed during my college years, helped me excel in a field where precision and detail were key. Slowly but surely, I began to prove my worth, earning respect from my colleagues, even though my family remained oblivious to my progress. One day, while going through a collection of costume jewelry, I stumbled upon a brooch that stood out. It didn't fit the usual patterns I was used to seeing in costume jewelry. It had weight, detail, and craftsmanship that suggested it could be something much more valuable. I couldn't let it go, so I spent my evenings researching it, using the databases available at the auction house to verify its authenticity. After hours of digging, I discovered that the brooch was an authentic Art Deco piece, worth far more than its initial appraisal. I brought it to my boss, armed with my research, and used my debate skills to convince him to have it properly authenticated. When the piece was sold at auction for $47,000, it was a breakthrough. It was my first major discovery, and it set the tone for my career in the auction world. The success with the brooch earned me respect and recognition within the company. I started taking on more responsibility, handling more valuable collections, and gaining access to items that were once beyond my reach. But no matter how much I excelled, there was still no recognition from my family. My achievements remained invisible to them, overshadowed by my sister's latest whims. The turning point came when I discovered another valuable piece. This time it was from the Rothschild collection. The item, which had been overlooked by others, turned out to be a rare and valuable treasure. When it was auctioned for $238,000, it solidified my place in the company. My expertise was undeniable and my reputation grew. But despite my growing success, my family still didn't care. At Sunday dinners, no one acknowledged my accomplishments. The conversation always turned back to my sister and her latest venture, her constant demands for attention. It was as if my success in the professional world meant nothing in comparison to whatever was going on in her life. I had worked so hard to build a future for myself, but it seemed as though my family would always remain indifferent. A week later, the company HR sent another email, this time with a subject line that made my pulse quicken. Official promotion offer, auction house department. I opened the email with a mix of excitement and skepticism, unsure of what to expect. The letter was formal but direct, offering me a promotion to a senior position in the company. It stated that my hard work, eye for detail, and ability to consistently identify rare and valuable items had not gone unnoticed. They specifically mentioned my success with high-profile items like the Rothschild collection, and how my skills were contributing to the company's growth. For a moment, I let the words sink in. Finally, recognition. My dedication, all those sleepless nights, the work I'd done without any acknowledgement from home, was now paying off. But just as quickly as that wave of pride washed over me, it was replaced by the familiar pang of disappointment. I knew my family wouldn't care, wouldn't celebrate this victory, and once again, my own achievement was something I'd have to cherish in silence. Despite that, I felt a quiet triumph. I had earned this on my own, and it was more than just a career milestone. It was proof that I could succeed despite all the odds. My life had always been marked by quiet victories, and I had learned to survive without ever expecting approval or recognition from my family. But everything changed one day when I made a discovery that seemed almost too surreal to believe. While working at the auction house, I was tasked with cataloging the estate of a recently deceased client. Estate sales were a routine part of the job, so it didn't seem unusual at first. But as I sifted through the paperwork, a particular document caught my attention. It was a legal paper outlining the distribution of the estate's assets. As I read further, my heart skipped a beat. The document stated that I was the sole beneficiary of a $12 million estate. At first, disbelief set in. How could it be mine? Could this really be happening? A simple estate sale had turned into something far bigger than I had anticipated. I double-checked the document, ensuring I wasn't mistaken. But there it was, clear and undeniable. This was mine. The wealth, the security, the future I'd never imagined. I was the one to inherit it. It wasn't just money. It was proof, a symbol of all the hard work and sacrifices I had made over the years in silence. It felt like a long overdue reward, one that had always been out of reach but was finally in my grasp. After discovering the $12 million inheritance, I knew I couldn't just accept it without fully understanding what it meant. I called a lawyer to get some clarity. I needed to know the legal details. Was I really the sole beneficiary? How could this happen? When the lawyer confirmed that everything was in order and that the inheritance was indeed mine, a wave of relief washed over me. It felt like a dream I never thought I'd wake up from. The lawyer, sensing my hesitation, chuckled softly and said, "Well, you've hit the jackpot, congratulations. You've got a lottery win on your hands, truly lucky." The words stung and reassured me at the same time. It felt almost surreal, too good to be true. But soon after, a sense of unease crept in. The weight of the situation started to sink in. I found myself awake late at night, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. What did it mean for my future? How would my family react when they found out? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this inheritance wasn't just money. It was a game changer, and it would change everything, including my relationship with my family. The excitement mixed with dread, making sleep impossible. On that Thanksgiving dinner night felt different. The usual chatter and laughter filled the room, but there was an underlying tension that I couldn't shake off. As I looked at my parents and my sister, I could tell something was off. Their glances toward me felt oddly distant, as if they knew something I didn't. The moment of realization came when my sister accidentally overheard my conversation with the lawyer. I hadn't planned on sharing the inheritance yet, but as I was discussing the details with the lawyer over the phone, I didn't notice her standing nearby, listening in. After I hung up, she immediately spoke up, her voice cutting through the tense atmosphere. "What were you just talking about? You inherited a huge amount, $12 million, right?" The room fell silent. My parents turned to look at me and I felt my heart drop. I was stunned to realize that the entire family had discovered the inheritance. Suddenly their attention shifted to me, as if they had all been waiting for this moment. My parents stayed silent for a beat, and then my dad spoke, his tone serious. "You need to share that money with your sister. Delta has been through so much and the family has sacrificed a lot for you. She deserves a part of it." It was like the ground had been pulled out from under me. They weren't congratulating me, they weren't proud of me for receiving the inheritance. Instead, they felt entitled to it. They believed I owed it to my sister simply because she needed it more than I did. The weight of their words hit me hard, and in that moment I realized that in their eyes, I would always be in the shadow of my sister. For a moment, there was silence around the table, the weight of the moment sinking in. My parents exchanged looks, and then the words came pouring out. "You have to share this with us," my mother said, her voice firm. "It's only fair. You also have to take care of her too. She deserves it too." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. It was as though the inheritance was never meant to be mine, despite my years of hard work and struggle. My parents' reaction wasn't joy for me, but a demand, a belief that I owed them, that I owed Delta for the sacrifices they made for her. I felt sick to my stomach. Delta sat there, her eyes wide, a mix of confusion and expectation in her gaze. "Why don't you just give it to me? You have enough, don't you?" she asked, her voice casual, as if money was something I owed her by birthright. The tension grew as the dinner continued. I tried to remain calm, but every word from my parents felt like a betrayal. How could they, after all these years of neglecting me, suddenly demand that I share the one thing I had worked so hard to earn? I looked around at their expectant faces, the faces of people who had never truly seen me for who I was. My parents argued that Delta had always been the center of attention in our family, that her health issues and needs had taken precedence. I was tired. I was tired of being the silent observer, the one who was always pushed aside, whose achievements were overshadowed by my sister's every whim. I felt trapped in a moral dilemma. On one hand, there was the expectation that I would be the good child, that I would sacrifice my success for the family. On the other, I knew that the inheritance was mine to keep. I had earned it, every dollar, every ounce of it. I thought back to the years I had spent proving myself, to the times I had worked late into the night to achieve things that no one had ever acknowledged. This was my moment, my victory. But the pressure from my family was overwhelming. They kept telling me I owed it to them, that the sacrifices they had made for Delta meant I should give this money away. It was the same old pattern, the unspoken rule that my needs and desires didn't matter as much as hers. My resentment bubbled to the surface. As I sat there listening to the demands and the accusations, I couldn't help but think back to my childhood, the years of being overlooked, the years of being told that my accomplishments didn't matter. I had spent so much of my life trying to prove my worth, only to be reminded that I was always second to my sister. In that moment, without any hesitation, I made my decision. I would keep the inheritance for myself. It wasn't just money, it was my reward for years of being overlooked, for standing on my own, and for proving that I could achieve something without relying on anyone. I had earned it, and no one, not even my parents, could take that from me. I looked at them both and said, "This money is mine. I don't owe anyone a single penny. I've worked for everything I have, and no one ever cared about what I did or how hard I worked. This inheritance is a symbol of everything I've achieved on my own. So I'm keeping it. I'm not sharing it with anyone." Their silence was deafening. I could see the shock on their faces, but I didn't feel guilty. For once, I was standing up for myself, and I wasn't going to let them guilt me into giving away what I had rightfully earned. Looking back on my journey, it's hard not to think about all the years I spent feeling invisible. From a young age, I learned to thrive in the shadows, to work hard without expecting recognition or praise from my family. The constant favoritism toward my sister made me feel like a nothing in my own home, always striving for something that seemed forever out of reach. But over time, I realized something crucial. I didn't need my family's validation to succeed. I had built my life on my own terms, and in doing so, I had found fulfillment in places I never thought possible. Becoming financially independent, building a career, and eventually discovering the inheritance wasn't just a stroke of luck. It was a result of years of hard work, perseverance, and determination. I might have been overlooked by my family, but that didn't stop me from creating a future that was all mine. And that, more than the inheritance, is my true victory. The wealth might have come unexpectedly, but the strength to handle it, the courage to finally stand up for myself, that was earned over a lifetime. Message of empowerment. Today I feel empowered. I no longer let my family's favoritism define my self-worth. I've learned that true success isn't about external validation. It's about the peace that comes from knowing you're the one who built your success from the ground up. The inheritance, as large as it was, is just a symbol of my hard-earned victory, my resilience, and the strength to overcome the odds. I finally understand that my worth isn't determined by how others see me, but by how I see myself and what I'm capable of achieving. Kindly share your thoughts in the comment below. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever felt overlooked or undervalued by your family? Have you struggled with favoritism or the pressure of living in someone else's shadow? Share your experiences in the comments below. Like me, many of us have to find our own path to success, whether or not our families understand or support us. Let's start a conversation about overcoming these challenges. What advice would you give someone who feels invisible in their own family? Let's talk about how we can all rise above and build the lives we truly deserve. Remember, the most important recognition comes from within. Keep going no matter what anyone else thinks.